It's Thursday, time for Worldview with Denis Campbell. Denis is editor-in-chief of UK Progressive Magazine, also author of the book Billionaire Boys, Election Freak Show. Let's go back for a second, Denis, to that moment in the second presidential debate when the topic of Mitt Romney's pension came up, and President Obama pointed out that Mitt Romney does have many investments in Chinese companies, including, as we've covered on this show, Chinese companies looking to help Iran develop not nuclear, but other types of energy, companies in China that have been caught embezzling money, so on and so forth. There's actually much more to the Mitt Romney Chinese investment story and many more specifics to look at. Isn't that right?
Indeed. This week we ran a series in UK Progressive Magazine starting in Monday and concluding on Wednesday just after the debate, looking at the investments in China and China in general as a place with which to do business. And I think it bears a lot of repeating because there were several times across the debate where, for instance, the young gentleman who stood up and said, where am I going to find a job? Well, if you look at his experience in moving jobs overseas, and if you look at the types of working conditions, which I saw during those 11 days in China, it was a propaganda tour. It was a media tour where they tried to show you all the wonderful things that were going on in that country. But then when you saw the conditions under which people worked, for example, in the Monday article, I talked about visiting a liquor plant where they literally had to take peat moss and turn it over without any protective equipment whatsoever. So they were working with the fumes coming off the peat with basically just shirt sleeves and these huge forks to flip it over. We in the media were there. We were overcome in a span of about 10 minutes, and I couldn't imagine what it would be like for somebody to work in those conditions for $1 a day in that plant over an extended period of time. If you look at the move and the pending move of the Sensata Technologies plant to China, these were high-skilled manufacturing jobs in the United States where people were making very intricate sensor machinery now being moved across into a similar environment because Mitt Romney, as he said on that 47% tape, absolutely loves the way in which there are people lining up for jobs in that country at $1 a day in dormitories, working 12 plus hours a day, 6 days a week.
Now, what we're going to hear from the right on a lot of these issues is, well, there's actually a lot of defenses. One, Mitt Romney actually used in the debate, which is, listen, my investments are in a blind trust. I have no control over those. Now, if we go back to 1994, Mitt Romney is on the record as saying hiding behind a blind trust is, quote, the biggest ruse. So that excuse kind of goes out the window. The other excuses will be, well, listen, if you hold a mutual fund in American companies, there's no question that some of those companies, which you're indirectly investing in, are doing things that are less than ideal. How do we counter that spin from the right?
Well, I think part of the issue is let's take a look at what Bain is and what Bain does. The primary thing that Mitt Romney is running on is his experience as a businessman and as a job creator. And as we heard from David Stockman over on the Daily Beast earlier this week, he was neither. All he was a speculator. He was somebody who would buy companies, dress them up, and flip them as quickly as he could.
Or harvest them, as he called it.
Yeah, harvest them, whatever you want to call it. And, to then be involved, for example, one of his investments that we talk about is in a company called Li and Fung Limited. I keep looking to make sure I get the name correct on that. What they do is they manage what's something called supply chain data and information for many large U.S. companies. That's a euphemism for offshoring and taking jobs and placing them overseas in countries like China, India, etc. And Li and Fung, and I'm looking over here just to make sure I get the list right, they've invested in doing the supply chain management for Toys R Us, Target, Walmart, Timberland, and they actually bought the entire manufacturing operation of Liz Claiborne for $83 million.
So this idea that his investments in China are neither directly nor indirectly hurting American jobs goes completely out the window.
It's a complete fallacy because he's dealing with companies that are of such questionable interest under the imprimatur of it being a Bain and Company company investment over which he has no control. Yet every time one of these investments does well, the sale of Sensata, if you think his $100 million IRA has a lot of money in it, once that goes through, it's going to have even more in it. They look for ways to shield income. One of the things I saw the other evening was the Daily Show appearance of J.K. Rowling, the author of the Harry Potter series. She was on again, and she's a billionaire in her own right. And she said something very telling. She said, look, the country supported me, that being the United Kingdom, when I most needed it. I was on benefits. I was really desperately trying to take care of my child. When I finally made it big, I didn't do what the Rolling Stones and several of these other mega stars did and move my residence to Monaco so I could get a better tax treatment. I felt an obligation and a responsibility, as do a lot of us here, to take care of the systems that have helped to support us along the way. There's not a point in time when all of us haven't fallen down and needed a safety net, but the simple answer is not to just take every possible deduction you can, every possible tax dodge you can, and move it overseas. There's such a thing called a social contract, and Elizabeth Warren in your state has talked about that throughout this campaign.
Yeah, I mean, that's a comment that's a comment that indicates some semblance of a moral compass, and it's actually laughable, the idea that Mitt Romney would ever make such a statement. I mean, it literally, the idea of it is funny because of how far on the opposite side of that spectrum he is.
Yeah, exactly. And when you look at, the investments he's made, the way in which he's done things, even putting his tax returns together, the 1 year that he's allowing the rest of the world to see, he had to adjust his income downward, some $2 million in charitable contributions, to get the paid amount up to 14%, which is half of what the average American pays in their taxes. That's just laughable. Over here on this side of the pond, we could not imagine anybody doing something like that blatantly. And who amongst us doesn't think that come the 7th of November, he's just going to file an amended return and put that $2 million back in his pocket?
No question about it. Last thing on this, the double standard that we're seeing here is incredible, because if we just imagine, what if President Obama were found to have invested in a company that was aiding Iran in research? The treatment would be completely opposite, but mainstream media, much of which is conservative, is just completely silent on this issue.
They are indeed, and the company you're talking about is Sinuk, the China National Offshore Oil Corporation.
Right.
They're doing business with the country Mitt says we should bomb at the request of Israel, Iran, and they're helping Iran to develop the North Pars natural gas field. So the hypocrisy throughout his entire campaign, not just on this issue, but suddenly being, the champion of women's rights when he wouldn't even support the Lilly Ledbetter bill. It's just beyond the pale. And here, I find it, as I sit here and I watch every word that comes out of his mouth, it reminds me of the old lawyer joke. How can you tell the lawyer is lying? His lips are moving.
Right. It's certainly no different with Mitt Romney and Paul Ryan, as we've seen. Denis Campbell, editor-in-chief of UK Progressive Magazine, the book Billionaire Boys Election Freak Show. Thanks as always, Denis. We'll talk to you next week.
Thanks. Bye-bye now.